We're on track to fund $500,000, over $500,000 in abortion procedures in 2025. Our average patient pledge is about $360. So, we are on track to fund, well over 1,000 procedures in this year, which is so exciting. And like you said, for an organization that's been around for 18 months, that's really exciting and incredible. I'm always mindful of what the actual need is out there. It is so great. It is so high. There are so many people who need funding for their procedures who can't access it. And so I'm always torn between this tension of so proud of everything we've done in such a short amount of time, and also very mindful of the fact there is a long road ahead and I want to be doing so much more. But yes, the Jewish community has been phenomenal since we launched Red Tent Fund.
Our guest is Allison Tombros Korman, founder of the Red Tent Fund, a nonprofit built on the idea that reproductive freedom isn't outside Jewish values, but drawn from them. Instead of turning women's choice into ideology, they start with a simple Jewish principle: we protect life by protecting the person living it. This conversation isn't about taking sides. It's about responsibility, compassion, and who gets to define Jewish values. Loud politics or actual Jews doing the work? If you care more about nuance than applause, you're in the right place. Let's get into it. Hi, Alli. Thank you so much for joining us today on Jew and Stew.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I just realized I said us because it's usually me and Daniel co-hosting, but it's just, you guys just get me today. So thank you so much for joining me on Jew and Stew today.
Me solo is very happy to be here as well. No problem.
Thank you. So I want to kind of start at your roots and how you came to do the work you do. You grew up in upstate New York. Where exactly did you grow up?
Right outside of Albany, in a tiny little town that nobody knows. So it's easier just to say Albany.
When I first came to the United States, I came over from the Soviet Union. We ended up outside of Syracuse in like a tiny little town with like no Jews. Well, no, that's not true. There was a JCC there, but there was like not many Jews. So what was it like growing up in Albany? What was your community like? What was your childhood like?
Oh, it's so funny to talk about this morning of all mornings. I actually just got back from a coffee this morning with a friend of, it's got to be 25 years or more now, who I grew up with doing Jewish youth group in upstate New York. So I guess you could say that those were really strong ties that kind of underpinned, my life and are still with me today. Grew up as part of a conservative synagogue and was very active in my Jewish youth group in USY, and went to Israel for the summer with Young Judea when I was 15 or 16. And it was a wonderful Jewish community to grow up in, perhaps a little homogeneous, not as diverse and reflective as the diversity that the Jewish community actually is. But, now that I've been in DC for 20 plus years, I've been able to see a lot more of that diversity that maybe wasn't as available to me in upstate New York.
Were your parents originally from here, or were your parents from other places?
They were both. They are both from here. They're both born here. Different sides of coming to Judaism, I would say. My mother's side from Germany originally, and grew up. She grew up Jewish. My dad is Greek by origin and converted to Judaism. So it's been interesting in my life to grow up with a non-Jewish maiden name. Always interesting what people think that, who they think they're talking to, and don't always necessarily expect a Greek last name to be a Jewish last name. So you hear some interesting things.
I would like to hear some of the interesting things you've heard by those.
It was just, little things here and there, people wouldn't expect, and if they didn't know us and they heard our last name, Tombros, which doesn't jump out as particularly Jewish, they would let their guard down and maybe say something about Jewish people in front of us. And, it would throw my sister or I for a loop, and my parents would just kind of say, yeah, well, people, they don't always expect to see that coming. Now it's a little different. I go by my maiden and my married name. And so I think people see me coming maybe perhaps a bit more, or maybe it's just the line of work I'm in now. I don't know. Hard to say.
What kinds of traditions do you remember partaking in that your parents wanted to pass down when you were young that really tied you to your Judaism?
Again, a really topical question. I just had the debate with my mother over break fast on whether or not we went to shul every year on Simchas Torah. I have like one memory of going to shul on Simchas Torah, and she swears to me, and my sister swears that we went every year. Clearly, that wasn't the holiday that really stayed with me. But we were, a small but very tight-knit family with my mother's siblings. My dad's an only child, so no one on that side of the family to celebrate Jewish holidays with, but my mom's siblings, very tight. Passover Seders every year, Rosh Hashanah together every year, kind of traveling throughout the Northeast to whose ever home was hosting that year. And, I think my husband and I, when we met, we really, on one of our first dates, bonded over our shared experience and love of doing Passover Seders with our family. And I think that's something that we're both really committed to passing on to our children.
I didn't grow up with many Jewish traditions because my family came from the Soviet Union. And I remember when I joined my congregation, and I belong to a Reform congregation here in Chicago. When I joined in 2020, it was when I was like really looking for community and wanting that for my children. My one child at the time, but now I have multiple children. But I remember attending, and it was put on by Momentum, like an education series for women. And there was a kind of like preparing for Passover, and to sit around the table and tell your own family personal like Exodus stories. And I had never done that. So we did that this year. And it was my parents and my husband's parents and my father. It was my husband's stepmom's mom, who had both now left the Soviet Union and has now left Israel to be here after the war broke out, to tell the Exodus stories to my kids and for them to connect our Exodus stories and everything we've experienced in the Soviet Union to the actual. It was so beautiful to frame that in that way, and I really enjoyed that. But did you go to Sunday school?
Yes, every Sunday from 9 to 12, and Mondays and Wednesdays from, I guess, 4 to 6. And grew up with a pretty, I would say, traditional, conservative, upbringing. Had my bat mitzvah when I was 12. And then managed to avoid going to Hebrew high school for most of the latter part of my years. Although I think in the beginning, my parents had ambitions that we would continue, Hebrew high school, and that just kind of flamed out. But
what was your bat mitzvah theme?
Oh gosh, books and reading, still one of my favorite things of all time. So rather than sitting at table number whatever, you sat at one of my favorite books. And I'm not saying that I'm trying to recreate that with my children because they'd never go for it. But I'm like, what about reading? Reading's great. You love books.
Are your kids coming up on bar and bat mitzvah ages?
They are. One already had hers, and the other one is having hers in the next year.
My oldest is having his next year as well. And thanks. And I'm like wholly underprepared. Like everybody else in his little Sunday school group, like they've got it all planned. Everything's done. They don't have to do anything. I just had my third child a few months ago. So I have not been in B'nai Mitzvah planning.
That seems very understandable.
Tell me all about it. But you said you avoided going to Hebrew high school. So it seems like you didn't want to go to Hebrew high school.
It was just, no one else was doing it. That was really what it was. It was a thing that existed for high schoolers. And at that point, I think most of us felt like, man, we've been doing this for a while. We know the things. And so just trying to, probably being like most teenagers, probably trying to get out of things we were not as excited about doing and would rather be hanging out with our friends. So it wasn't really a requirement. It was more of like an add-on, nice to have in our community.
So you went to public school, and your peer group, were you mainly still in a Jewish peer group, or did you have a more secular, diverse peer group?
I thought that there were a lot of Jewish people growing up at my school because I knew all the Jewish kids, but in reality, I think it was actually a very small percentage of the overall school population, which is probably part of the reason that I gravitated towards Jewish youth group. I think I went to Jewish sleepaway camp and felt really comfortable in those spaces. And, it was a really nice way to be amongst people with shared history and shared connection when most of the week, Monday through Friday, we were, living a very secular life.
Can I tell you how I ended up at Jewish sleepaway camp?
Absolutely. I love Jewish sleepaway camp stories.
So again, my parents are from the Soviet Union where, children just pretty much raised themselves while their parents were living a pretty hard life. And, my parents didn't necessarily have a very joyous or happy childhood. And so at 12 or 13 in the summertime, I was kind of left to my own devices and I did not make good decisions. And I got into a lot of trouble at the time. So my parents said, we're not doing this again. And they sent me, and I thought it was going to be a punishment. They're like, we are sending you to Jewish camp. You're going for 4 weeks. You're going to not, going to be busy. You're not going to be getting in trouble this summer. And I was like, why are you sending me away?
Why don't you love me?
Yes. So they sent me away. I think it took me about 2 days to completely fall in love with being at Jewish camp. So I was there for 4 weeks, and then you have your first session, and then kids go home for the weekend, and then you have your second session. I was only signed up for the first session, and within a week, I was writing my parents' letters saying, "I'm staying for second session. Please register me for second session." So I ended up staying for 4 weeks. Came home for the weekend, went back, had the best time ever. Went again next year, and soon I kind of aged out. I started volunteering with younger kids at day camp as a counselor in training, and now my oldest child goes to the Jewish overnight sleepaway camp that I went to, and. Yeah.
That's
and every time we go up there, we went up there for a parents' weekend and things, and just get to relive there's so much magic in Jewish day camp. There really is.
Yeah. I promise this is not a plug or this was a happy accident, but it's so relevant to what we're talking about. My husband and his sisters actually started a film production company a couple of years ago, and their first feature film is out and working its way through Jewish film festivals right now. And it all takes place at a Jewish summer camp. It was actually filmed at the camp where his parents met, and where he and his sisters they then attended, and now our oldest child goes to that camp. So Jewish summer camp film? Really runs deep. It's called the Floaters. It's kind of like a Breakfast Club meets Jewish summer camp type movie. Hopefully we'll be streaming in the next, year or so. But in the meantime, you can catch it at a lot of Jewish film festivals happening all around the country right now.
Amazing. I'll definitely keep an eye on. We're involved. We've partnered with the JCC on the Chicago Jewish Film Festival before. And we've had people from our team come and talk. We had October 8th screening, and we had people from our college, our college team that deals with the issues happening on college campuses come and talk about that movie. So I'm definitely going to keep an eye out. And this sounds like a movie I would quite enjoy because I love Breakfast Club and I love Jewish day camp. So
it's very authentic to the Jewish summer camp experience. If you have gone to Jewish sleepaway camp, whichever camp you may have attended, there will definitely be things that are resonant that remind you of, we did it just like that at my camp, or we did it the same, but a little bit different, because each has their own special flair. But it's really lovely to be back in that world when you watch the film. Cause I think those of us who grew up going to sleepaway camp, we miss that space.
Yeah, I found it interesting. So my son is back at public school, but we did pull him out and put him in Jewish day school for a year. And I found that the kids from Jewish day school don't go to Jewish sleepaway camps because they get they get so much of it during the school year. So they do like baseball camp or they do, other things. And I'm like, oh, you guys are really missing out. Like
You're
Jewish
missing
summer
out.
camps is where it's at. Okay, I could go on about Jewish summer camp, but so you went to high school and then you went to Michigan for college. How'd you end up in Michigan?
Oh, well, a couple of things. You know, wanted to leave upstate New York and try something new, maybe following in my older sister's footsteps, who went to a big state school out in the Midwest, but a different one. So I was like, well, I'll do it, but just a little different. And not that this really plays a big part, but I do think it's a nice full circle moment. My favorite book of all time is a book called A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, and it follows the life of this Irish family in Brooklyn at the turn of the century. And the main character, the protagonist, does end up going to the University of Michigan. It's probably like, I don't even know what year it is when she goes, 15. I can't even remember what year it happened, what year it takes place, maybe even earlier than that. But I always loved the fact that this book that I loved and read over and over and over again, that I ended up at the same institution as this character that I felt so connected to.
Did it deliver on your hopes of the experience in the book?
Oh, it was the best. It was such an incredible experience. And I know we're a bit much as like alumni of this institution. I live outside of DC or right in Washington, DC, where you feel like you can't, swing a bat without hitting at least 3 people who went to the University of Michigan. In Chicago, it feels very much the same. When I go there and, give talks and people read my bio and say University of Michigan, the number of Go Blues that get yelled out is just so heartwarming. I feel like, oh, I'm back with my people.
That's great. So very positive experience at the University of Michigan. And then you went to Johns Hopkins for graduate school. And how was that?
Very different, very, very different in the sense that, at Michigan, it was living and learning in this community. Hopkins, I was living here in DC and commuting up to Baltimore. So it was just a very different experience. I didn't feel as enmeshed with the community, but I still really loved the education that I got there. And there's no question that it put me on the path that I'm on right now in terms of loving public health, loving health education, really kind of wrapping my head around the fact that there could be a way that I could work in health as someone who doesn't particularly love the sight of blood. So becoming a healthcare professional was probably not going to happen for me, but I still really loved being in health work. And so that was a phenomenal experience for me.
Do you have family that was in health work before, or what started drawing you to it? And what made you know you don't want to go into the sight of blood version? You don't want to like become a surgeon?
It's funny, actually both of my parents do come from a healthcare background, but it's the completely other side. They both, as I was growing up, were working in the pharmaceutical industry, which is obviously deeply connected to, but a very different side of the field than the public health work that I'm doing. But, I grew up watching them, be part of that community and thinking about the holistic health system. And I think that probably had a lot to do with it. I also think if I think really hard and try to trace it back, growing up in upstate New York, I remember going to the Planned Parenthood in Albany with some friends when I was probably 16 or 17 for healthcare screening and services. And it was a really formative experience. I remember us going in there as high school students who drove ourselves downtown and got ourselves to Planned Parenthood and told the healthcare providers, what we needed in terms of taking care of our bodies and ourselves, where we were with our, sexual health at the time, and them being so responsive and saying like, okay, great. You need birth control. We got you. And it was a really formative experience in terms of having people trust that people actually do know what's best for their own bodies. Like someone can tell you what they need for their body. Your job is, and when you're in health, is just to listen and try to help them meet those goals as best as they can. So I think that really left a big mark.
So you were 15 or 16 and you went with a group of your friends to Planned Parenthood. A, how did you know about Planned Parenthood? And B, like, did you have primary care, or what made you feel like you couldn't talk to, the healthcare professionals you already had, that you needed to find these additional resources for you and your friends? I mean, I'm not saying you found them. I'm saying your whole group decided to seek this out. So what was happening at the time that caused that?
It's funny. I don't even remember exactly who was there that day. I don't think there was even a group of us. It was probably just one or two of us who went together. But, we were living in a small town and still very much going to our pediatrician who had a relationship with our parents. And so I think the thinking was, we know what we need. We want the privacy to be able to, get the healthcare services that we need, but we don't really want to be walking into the local family pediatrician, in town and asking for it. And I don't know how I knew about Planned Parenthood. I can only assume that, to some extent, there was a pretty, I don't want to say open conversation about health and sexuality in my house, because I don't want to overstate it, but it also wasn't a dirty secret or something that I think my parents were hiding from me. So it's entirely possible, my mom dropped the name Planned Parenthood at some point and I said, "What's that?" Or I don't really know how I knew about it. It's a good question.
I don't think people know, all the resources they do provide at Planned Parenthood, and including, just screening resources, which I think everybody should be getting screened regularly for,
Absolutely.
you do all your other health screenings. You need to be doing these health screenings as well. And, yeah, but I know, like, we're not of dissimilar ages. I think you're maybe just a couple years older than me. And, I remember at that age, there was still such a stigma about access to birth control for women. And it was not as publicly talked about, or not, I think it's more common for girls of that age to have these conversations with their primary care doctors now than it was back then.
I mean, I think, it's not funny. I guess it's kind of sad. For quite a few years before I started doing the abortion work that I'm doing, I was working in campus sexual violence prevention and response. So working with colleges and universities on writing policies and programs and procedures to prevent and respond to sexual violence on campus. This was right around the time that the Me Too movement was really just taking off. And I had all of these administrators and folks on campus who would say, what are we going to do to end sexual violence on campus? You've got this program. How can we eliminate this problem? And I kind of would say jokingly, but really not, well, unless you have a time machine to take me back to when all of your students were, young children, and teaching them about their bodies and how their bodies work, and consent and bodily autonomy and trust and respect, and how to ask for what they need from their sexual partner or partners or whatever it may be. So I'm not sure I can do anything to eliminate it. I might be able to reduce it. I may be able to prevent some instances of it happening through risk reduction, but there's no eliminating sexual violence in my mind. If people don't understand their bodies, they don't understand what it means to have control over their bodies and autonomy over their bodies. And so I think it's not a huge surprise to me that I do the work that I do now, because I think it's all very connected.
Just so to timeline this a little bit. So the initiative was called Culture of Respect. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And this was after you graduated from Johns Hopkins that you were writing policy?
It wasn't so much writing policy. It was really programmatic work. It was working with the different stakeholders on campus, be the administrators or fraternity and sorority life, or the health, people in university health services, or really all over the campus, to think about what university policies need to be in place to prevent and respond to sexual violence when it does happen. How do you educate your student population? How do you educate your teacher and professor and graduate assistant populations to know how to respond appropriately when and if someone does disclose sexual violence, or they have a suspicion that something is going on? And how do you work with both parties or all parties in this process to try to come to some kind of place where there can be resolution or a path forward for both perpetrators and victims of sexual violence.
I know more women have been victims of sexual violence than we'll ever know, and the actual statistics are quite staggering. I grew up learning about how to deal with sexual violence from Law and Order, SVU. Like that was, I don't think the education, like we would have health ed, we would have sex talks and things. I mean, even remember, a rabbi coming to my Jewish overnight sleepaway camp, but it was not really through that lens. I do think we're living in a time where the education component is more robust. I'm just looking at my child and the information that is presented by schools, for example, and the conversations around consent and the conversations about learning anatomy and understanding things. We recently had a podcast guest on, and a wonderful, amazing woman named Shoshana, and she does work within the more Orthodox community. And one of the main issues that they were dealing with is like breast cancer screening, for example, and that women were dying because they didn't know to get screenings, and that they didn't know the correct anatomical names for their body parts to even ask for the health care that they were needing. So it's that education component is huge. How do you feel that component has come through since we were children to now? What are you seeing?
It's really a mixed bag, I think. And that's a really interesting question. Because I think back to the sex education that I received in high school, which I wish I was making this up, but this is very much true, was provided by the football coach at our high school. And it was everything that you think it was. Everything that you think about a football coach teaching sex education to a bunch of high schoolers. I mean, this could have been a sitcom, the way this class was taught. And so in some ways, I think, oh gosh, thank goodness we've come so far. We have conversations about consent now that we were never having when I was in high school or growing up. We do have this more robust conversation, or at least more places where you can get answers if you have questions. And hopefully people are going to places that have credible fact-based, health information, as opposed to just relying on their friends, which is what I think a lot of us did in that era. And at the same time, I live in a state that really only provides abstinence-only education. And that breaks my heart, because I know that when you only provide abstinence education to young people, the health outcomes are dramatically worse. You're going to end up with more unplanned pregnancies. You're going to end up with more sexually transmitted infections. You're going to end up with worse health outcomes. So it's this tension between, we know better, but we're not doing better yet for every young person in this country. And that breaks my heart a lot. And I know our children who are, of tween and teen age years get tired of us being my husband and I, pausing a TV show and saying, well, this is really problematic because did you see how no one asked for consent here? And they're like, oh, can you just press play on the movie? Like we know, we've heard it. And we're like, nope, we have to stop and talk about it. And they're like, oh, do we really still have to? I'm like, yes, we do.
Well, that's great. Cause, I think, a lot of us grew up with like not really having those conversations or having that information, and it's important.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope that when and if their friends come to them with questions, I hope they have good, factual, evidence-based information on their side, so they can at least be a good resource that someone has shared with them the answers to these questions.
I'm going to jump forward a little bit, and we'll get back to your career timeline, because I do want to get to like DC Abortion Fund and Red Tent and everything. But somebody who actively worked to reduce sexual violence on college campuses, and when the information about the violence that was especially committed to women on October 7th started becoming public, and the reaction or the silence that we heard from a lot of women's organizations. Can you talk about, like, take me back to you're watching this unfold? Like, what are you thinking? What are you feeling?
I mean, there are no words, right? I mean, gutted. I don't think any of us will ever forget the things that we saw on October 8th and in the time that's followed. I don't think we needed a deep, robust investigation of the events of that day to know that sexual violence was being used as a weapon of war. There was, first person footage that we were seeing that indicated that that was likely the case. And since that time, there have been so many brave and incredible people, both in the US and in Israel, who have gone back and done that investigation because, yes, of course it needs to happen. You need to have that proof. But I think all of us were looking at that feeling in our heart that that was probably the reality of what was happening. And I would not be, I think, hyperbolic in saying that the silence that came from so many institutions and organizations after October 7th, be it from local organizations all the way up through the UN and the Commission on Women, that silence was devastating, absolutely devastating. And nothing can really put into words what it felt like or how it was felt, not just by those of us sitting here watching it, but I can't even imagine by those who experienced it. Nothing can put that into the words, but that hashtag Me Too Unless You're a Jew really, really sat with me and still really weighs on my heart because it felt like we were told for so long, this is your responsibility. You come forward, you tell your story, you shine a light on it, and know the events that follow will never be perfect because we don't have a perfect judicial system and we don't have a perfect criminal justice system to adjudicate these instances of sexual violence. And we know that it's not a perfect system, but we have this obligation to shine a light on it and to, ask survivors to be brave enough to step forward. And then we had so many people, who had those experiences on October 7th, and they were just discounted. They were just discounted.
They did everything right. They did everything by the book. They did everything how they were supposed to do it in terms of getting these stories out. And it was...
That's right.
For me, I had just had my second child and I was recovering postpartum. And when the stories started coming out, it actually affected my physical recovery. And I was working with a very intelligent women's health pelvic floor doctor and physical therapy specialist. And she actually told me to, I had to do a media blackout. I couldn't hear any news about it because she said, the trauma of hearing the details of what had happened to these women was physically affecting my ability to recover because I had, pelvic trauma, and you're hearing these horrific stories of, I can't even say it, but I don't know if people realize the amount of trauma that was done to Jewish women, or women in general, when they heard the details and continue to hear the details. So it took me a while to really heal a bit and then be able to process the information. And we did a public screening of Screams Before Silence. We gathered over 180 people because there was something in having to witness and hear, not having, but I think it's always a privilege to witness, bearing witness, but it's difficult. It's not something you're like, I'm going to go get my popcorn and watch this movie. It's a hard thing to choose to do, to come bear witness in this way. So we gathered 180 people and did a group screening of Screams Before Silence. And we had a female IDF soldier join us on Zoom, and we had a Nova survivor join us as well and share their stories after the screening. And then we did a second screening where we had the director of the movie come do a Q&A with us afterwards. But, it was such I don't know if we've ever had so much violence against women so publicly and viscerally, and so much of it at once, like we did during that.
There were no words. There were no words for how horrific that was. And I think, like you said, continues to be. You don't forget seeing those images or hearing those voices, and you don't forget the way that women were not believed. That stays with you.
Absolutely. So let's back to to your next steps in your career. So, I mean, this is quite an accomplishment. You became the executive director of the DC Abortion Fund.
Yes and no. I'm gonna be factually accurate. I was the senior strategy and operations director of the DC Abortion Fund. This is one of those weedy details that I think is important to make sure I'm very clear about. When I was hired at the DC Abortion Fund, I was hired using a co-leadership model. So there was actually 3 of us who were hired as co-directors of the organization. And it was going to be shared leadership, but there was no training or I don't know how else to say it. Most of us know how to operate in hierarchy. We're pretty used to it. It's maybe not a perfect system, but it's something at least we're all familiar with. So when someone is your boss, you kind of understand what the boss, manager, managee, employee is. We were hired as co-directors and asked to lead the organization using this shared leadership model where each of us kind of had a third of the portfolio and a third of the power. Very quickly, it became clear that was a really difficult way to operate. 3 people is not an easy number for decision-making purposes. And we actually went to the board as a group and said, this is really challenging. Can we do something about this leadership model and kind of put one person at the helm of the organization so that we can have a way of making decisions without it always feeling like it was 2 against 1, if somebody disagreed with a decision. And so I was promoted to senior operations and strategy director of the organization, which meant that I was the most senior person in the organization, but I was not executive director in name or in title, and I did not have that unilateral power. We were still asked to do shared decision-making, but I guess you could think of me as the most senior person and maybe the tiebreaker, if you will. And the reason that's important and the reason why that matters to this story and to my story is because I think if I had been the executive director of the organization during October 7th, when all of this was happening, I would have made a unilateral decision that said, we as an organization are not going to take a position on something that is happening halfway across the world. That is not why people give us money. That is not why, this organization was created. It was created to fund abortion in the DC Metro Virginia area. But because I did not have that unilateral authority, we found ourselves in a very, very tricky place. So both for fact-checking purposes. Yeah.
Thank you. And I want to get there to the difficult place, but let's talk about the job. Like, how long were you there? How did you feel about the job? Tell us the experience of being in that role.
I was there for about 18 months at the time, I think, when I resigned, which we'll get to, or what have you. So I'd been there for well over a year, and I was ecstatic to be in this job. I really intentionally made a decision to go from the campus sexual violence work to abortion-specific work. I feel very lucky that throughout my career, I have worked on sexual and reproductive health issues from a variety of different perspectives. I've done it from international work. I've worked with colleges and universities. I've worked with healthcare providers. I've gotten to see this work from many different sides, and I think that's a privilege that a lot of people in my field have not experienced. I was really intentional about wanting to move to those different places and get different perspectives. And so when I was when I made the decision to leave Culture of Respect, 7 years talking about campus sexual violence is a long time. It's a pretty exhausting topic to be swimming in and day out. And so I was thinking about what I wanted to do next. And I was looking at the writing on the wall, looking at the fact that, the Supreme Court was likely going to overturn Roe v. Wade, whether or not people were ready to hear that or not. It was coming. And I decided that I wanted to put all my time and energy into what I thought was the most important and pressing need in sexual and reproductive health in that moment, which was abortion. And so I was very specifically seeking a job in the abortion space. And so
why did you feel that was the most pressing need in the space at the time too? Why?
Because I think those of us working in the field already knew that while Roe v. Wade was the law of the land, we as people who potentially could become pregnant, and I use that term intentionally broadly, right? Anyone with a uterus who could become pregnant, we had legal access to abortion through Roe, but that does not mean that people actually had practical access to abortion. There were always so many barriers standing in the way of access to abortion, whether it was cost or logistics, or you needed an abortion that the type of abortion that wasn't offered in your area, and so you were going to need to travel, or abortion wasn't covered by your health insurance, or the Hyde Amendment prevented federal funds being spent on abortion. We used to talk about Roe being the floor. It was the bare minimum that people were provided in terms of, sure, you have legal access to abortion. That never meant that everyone in this country could actually get access to abortion. And if Roe was going to be overturned, which was looking more and more likely every day, that meant that floor was only going to sink lower, and less people would be able to access abortion. And so to me, that felt like the most pressing, the most important thing that we needed to deal with in our field in that moment.
So you got this job very intentionally, very happy to be in this job. You're there
Excited,
for 18 months, excited, liking the work you're doing, feeling like you're accomplishing what you want to be accomplishing.
Yeah. And it's funny, as I think about my career kind of in reverse, it kind of is like is like a funnel that got narrow. I started out working with healthcare providers on the national scope. Then I went even bigger and was doing international work. Came back to national work with sexual violence prevention and response, and then wanted to get even more local with this job in abortion. And I ended up taking a job, that was extremely local. It was serving the DC metro community, or those traveling to the community for abortion care. And I don't think that's an accident. I think there's something really exciting about thinking I'm going to affect change at the international level, and it's going to be big and it's going to be important, and kind of working your way back to realizing, maybe the most impactful thing you can do is just to help one person at a time in your own community.
Yeah, I think being hyper local focused, and that's part of our mission at Chicago Jewish Alliance, is we are hyper local on the Chicagoland area. There's obviously we've been toying with the term anti-Semitism versus Jew hatred. And, we're dealing with Jew hate all over the country. And we could be trying to tackle it everywhere, but how effective is that? And it's like the same thing with elections. Like a lot of people always focus on the big, shiny national, even the senatorial, but like in Chicago, we have aldermen. Like they're little mayors of our little regions. And sometimes these elections are won by 25 votes. Like if you're going to actually create change, like 25 votes, like mobilize 30 Jews. If we are having somebody who is not in our interests and doing things that are harmful to our community, you can mobilize 30 people. And that's, going to create a lot of real change versus screaming at these like big arena topics that you don't have a lot of control over.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So loving your job, everything's going good. I mean, I'm sure there's challenges, of course. October 7th happened, and what did you see happen in your organization and in the space overall?
It was like night and day. October 9th, I believe, was the day that our social media coordinator at the DC Abortion Fund posted online. It was Indigenous Peoples Day, and made a post tying to Indigenous Peoples Day and tying it to this idea of land back for so many populations, for Indigenous people here in this country. And she cited a couple other places around the world, and then hashtag, free Gaza or free Palestine. And I remember, seeing it. I think I was at home and I was scrolling through Instagram and looking what, my organization, DCAF, had posted. And I wasn't approving every post that went up by any means. I was seeing it like everybody else. And I was like, wow, that feels really tone deaf. That feels really unkind. And like October 7th is less than 48 hours in the rearview mirror. I don't want to speak for anyone else, but I know that me, my family, my community, we were still reeling absolutely reeling, glued to our phones and TVs, trying to get news about what was happening and trying to just understand what we had seen on that Saturday. And so I reached out and I said, this just feels really tone deaf and really icky. And so, I'm wondering if you can maybe take it down. And we went back and forth a little bit. And in the end, she ended up deciding to take the post down. But that was really kind of like the first in many conversations about how is this organization going to or not going to respond to this issue that is happening across the world? What is our obligation as an abortion fund, as a feminist organization, to say something or not say something? What should that look like? And it just kind of created this tear in the fabric of the organization that just continued to rip over the following weeks. It's worth noting I was the only Jewish employee. There were no Jewish people on the board of the organization. And so,
how many employees in the organization?
I think at that time we were 5 or 6. There's only a handful of us.
It's quite small. Yeah.
Very small, 5 or 6 and an intern or so. So yeah, it very quickly devolved into me on one side of this issue and everyone else in the organization, staff and board on the other, because it was my feeling that this is not why people give to their local abortion fund. What we saw happening on October 7th and after that is horrific, was horrific, continues to be horrific, is awful. And I just kept saying the smartest minds in our generation have not been able to figure out this problem. What do we as an abortion fund across the world with no real expertise in this issue other than our own learning and experiences have to offer to this conversation? And I felt like the answer was nothing. It was just noise, and we were not actually going to be helping anyone by posting these things. And not only was it deeply painful to me as the only Jewish staff person, but it was impacting our community of donors as well. There were Jewish people in the DC Abortion Fund community who were reaching out to my colleagues, people who had been longtime supporters of the organization, saying, I'm seeing what you're posting, because this went on for weeks, posting, taking things down, discussions over what could be posted, what couldn't, what have you. And seeing what was posted and saying, like, I don't feel seen by this community at all. I don't feel heard. I feel pushed away. I know that there were people who reached out to colleagues and said, can we sit down and have a conversation about this? And they were not granted, that conversation. And I just think
we've seen this so much, unfortunately. I mean, we've seen this with the Women's March, for example. We've seen this in a lot of these spaces where somehow Jewish voices and Jewish female voices are being excluded from the kind of the rights we have fought so hard for people to have. And, in Chicago, I think yes, we have like a more conservative Orthodox community, but a lot of the Jews, I think, are definitely left-leaning and are for women's rights. And I'm assuming it's very similar in DC that, I'm sure a lot of your big donors were, as you mentioned, were Jewish as well. And it's like, why do we keep getting shut out of these spaces that we have been in and supportive of? Like, we've seen it in the LGBTQ community. We've seen it, I know somebody who's Jewish and transgendered, and they've been pretty much ostracized for their support of Israel from all their safe spaces for the transgender community. And, like, it's affecting people's livelihood, their mental health. But, you're a women's health, reproductive health organization, and you're not only not like publicly posting things that are not in support of women who were just sexually assaulted in a really brutal way, and then re-traumatizing like women like me who are living through this experience of like physically like dealing with the trauma of what just happened. So you quit very publicly. And like I think
not at first. Not at first.
Okay, let's get there. So you really try, like it was you versus them. You really try, and you know there's 5 of you. Like you guys must have, you're like a close knit team. Like you probably were so close. Like this must have hurt so much because these are people you've been working. Like, I mean, I know that I talk to my teammates at Chicago Jewish Alliance more than I talk to my husband. Like we're always, you know, like you must have been so close with these people. So how, you know, how, like this must have hurt so much that this was happening.
Incredibly painful. Incredibly painful. It felt, I mean, to say it felt like having the rug ripped out from under you is just an absolute understatement. And it was both of those things, as you were saying. It was these are people that I'm in community with and that I work with every day. I'm in conversation with. And, you know, at first I wasn't even so adamant that we should say nothing. I just thought if we're going to say something, it has to be encompassing of the whole picture, right? Like you said, we're a feminist organization and we have every reason to believe that sexual violence was used as a weapon of war. And so if we are going to say anything, how can we leave that part out of the equation? How can we only talk about the events after October 7th? And I just kept getting the door slammed in my face. No, we're not going to talk about that. No, we're not going to talk about that. And I think that was one of the things that really, just absolutely broke me. Is like, how can we decide who is worthy of our sympathy or our empathy as a feminist organization? Shouldn't all victims of sexual violence, all victims of violence have our hearts and our eyes and our ears and our minds? And I just didn't feel like there was any give there. I also think it was really heartbreaking to me that, and maybe this is just the way I remember it. And, you know, everybody I know remembers things differently. My grandmother used to say there's 3 sides to every story, yours, mine, and the truth. So this is just my side of the story and the way I remember it. I don't remember anyone at that time ever even asking me, well, Alli, you've been there. You've spent time in that part of the world. Like, what do you think about what is happening? What do you think about the policies of the Israeli government or settlements or this or that? And I would have gladly had a conversation about my perspective and my worldview. But it kind of felt like we skipped over that part and we went immediately to this litmus test of you're either with us, you're against us, you're in favor of, you know, you're on the side of the people who are being attacked with military force, or you're not. And I just don't think it's that simple. I don't think it's that black or white. And it felt to me like there was no interest in having that conversation.
Well, and everybody all of a sudden became experts on a part of the world that they've never spent much time thinking about before, all of a sudden. But I grew, I mean, I wouldn't say I grew up in a liberal bubble, but like, as we talked about, like the majority of Jews, especially in the North Shore of Chicago, do lean more liberal and more liberal leaning. And that's, you know, the social group that I came out of. And it's been a hard space to be in. It's been like an identity crisis, I feel like. What's that been like for you?
Heartbreaking. I like so many people, I feel very politically homeless right now. I feel just kind of, were it not for this phenomenal group of individuals that have come together since October 7th on WhatsApp, this phenomenal group called Jews in Repro that I'm part of, which is people all over the country, actually all over the world, who are Jewish people who work in the reproductive health field, all different sides, abortion providers and abortion fund workers and researchers and philanthropists and just people of all different, you know, perspectives from this field coming together and agreeing that we're going to talk about not the politics of the day, you know, not the policies of any one government, but just talk about what it means to be Jewish and working in reproductive health since October 7th. I mean, this has been my lifeline. I don't know that I would have been able to build what we've built with the Red Tent, or to keep in this field were it not for that group.
What made me want to have you on the podcast, and what I admire so much, is how much you quit, but you weren't quiet about it. You continued to, I've seen countless articles. You are not brushing the story of what happened to you and your experience under the rug. You're not apologetic for your viewpoints. You're strong in your viewpoints. You're strong in your Zionism. You're strong in your support of Israel. You're strong in your Judaism. And, I have so much admiration. I think people are scared to stand up and speak out and share these stories. And I really thank you for your voice and not being silenced on this. I really do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It was not an easy decision, and it was one that took some time to come to. But, I hit a point where I was sitting there thinking, am I going to continue to work in this field? Can I continue to work in this field after what I've gone through? And then I got really upset. This is my life's work. I have put everything I have for the last 20 plus years into this field. I don't want to leave it. I care about this too much. Why should I have to leave this work that I'm so passionate about at all, let alone for something that has nothing to do with the work itself? Us as an organization, DC Abortion Fund as an organization, taking a stand on, anything having to do with this conflict, in my way of thinking, wasn't going to actually help anyone. If it was actually going to help, then maybe, I would understand, and I'd find a way to reconcile or quiet the mental conflict of this. But I just felt like we're throwing this all away, and this isn't going to help anyone.
So you founded Red Tent Fund in 2024, and it's an abortion fund rooted in Jewish values and teachings that affirm the rights to abortion for all. Can you talk a little bit about the Jewish values and teachings that went into the decision? And what does Red Tent mean?
The Jewish values and laws and teachings are so fully infused in everything that we're doing. I think a lot of people now are starting to learn more about the Jewish perspective, not just on abortion, but Jewish perspectives on so many things related to sexual and reproductive health and rights. I just co-authored a op-ed with Alana Frank, who's the founder of the Jewish Fertility Fund, and we talked about the way that abortion bans are impacting both abortion seekers and fertility, and the Jewish take on those things. But really, we have a lot of Jewish text to support and affirm the right to abortion. We talk about how the existing life of the person always takes precedence over the possibility of life or the prospective life. We have, the Parshat Mishpatim, where we talk about, what is our understanding of where life begins, and what is the punishment for ending a life. Well, it's not an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, or ending a pregnancy. We don't think of a pregnancy as a life in and of itself, separate from the pregnant person. It is not until, that being draws breath that we think of it as a separate entity. And so we have Talmud,
it's not even breath, right? I remember there's certain things where I think there's certain Jewish burial rites that the baby, this is a little bit difficult to talk about. The baby needs to be over 3 months old to have been given. I grew up not really well connected to my Judaism, so I don't always know the correct terms or things for things. But I know there's they have to be over 3 months old. And the reason for this, I think, is, so many women had so many babies, and a lot of them, we didn't have the medical advances we have now. A lot of babies, unfortunately, did not make it. And it was difficult and expensive and a burden on the family to perform these types of funerals. So I think that's where some of those Jewish, not even regulations, but kind of Jewish laws on where we consider life to be came from. but you probably know more about that than me.
Well, I'm definitely not a rabbi, and I always like to defer to the rabbis on this. And I know it's complex and there are multiple understandings of this, but by and large, the American Jewish community is incredibly supportive of the right to abortion. The study that everyone goes to is the Pew study on religion and abortion. And at that sampling, 83% of American Jews affirm the right to abortion in most or all cases. We have a huge history and tradition of being involved in this work. Some of our earliest healthcare providers, one of the co-founders of Planned Parenthood, this blows my mind. I've been doing this work for so long, and I never knew this until about 2 years ago. If you ask anyone in our field who founded Planned Parenthood, they'll tell you Margaret Sanger did, and maybe they'll tell you that she founded it with her sister as well. There was a third co-founder who was a Russian Jewish immigrant named Fanya Mendel, who also was part of that process. And I just think we have been part of and leaders in this work for as long as this work has been happening. And so when I think about, what we do as the Red 10, it's so important to me that we embrace the laws and teaching that affirm the right to abortion as Jews, that we honor the fact that this is an issue of religious and reproductive freedom for us. No one faith in this country gets to define what, the laws and teachings mean for everyone else. And it's fine if your religion says that you shouldn't have an abortion. My religion says under, these and these circumstances, it is not only perfectly permissible, but, expected or required. And so I think, we have this kind of rich, deep history, and I wanted to lean into it. And in my mind, these are my Jewish values, and I don't want to assume that they apply to anyone else. But for me, being Jewish, doing TikkunOlam, repairing the world, does not just mean doing it for those people who are like you, or doing it for those who are in your little bubble alone. And so it was not even a question to me that when I created Red 10, that we were going to fund abortion for anyone who needed it, not just Jewish people, not just people who fit a certain perspective on their ideological or religious or political views. We were going to fund anyone who needed it without qualification. And I'm so, so proud that to me feels like living our Jewish values.
What does Red Tent mean? Where did you get the name?
Some folks may remember it was probably 20 plus years ago. Anita Diamond wrote a book called The Red Tent. And it is this incredible imagining of the story of Dinah from the Old Testament. She's a very as Anita Diamond makes up her story, she has this incredible trajectory. It's all, it all comes from the brilliance of her mind. But one of the main points of that novel is the red tent is this imagined menstrual tent in the camp of the patriarchs. And all of the matriarchs, the mothers, the aunts, the daughters, the grandmothers, all gather in the red tent as part of their, menstrual cycle. You can imagine, as women tend to do, they sync up. So everyone's going into the red tent at the same time. And to the men of the camp, it's this idea of they're, going off to deal with this burden of menstruation. And then really what's happening inside the red tent it is the place where women are sharing generational knowledge. It's where they're teaching each other about their bodies and about pregnancy and about birth and about death and about the wisdom that they carry. And so when I thought about what should I call this organization, the red tent just seems like the only possible answer. It to me speaks to women, the reproductive life cycle, the Jewish piece of this. And frankly, you probably are familiar with the idea that, our patriarchs and matriarchs tents open on all sides to bring people into the tent, to welcome the stranger. And I thought, well, that's what I really want to be doing here. I want anyone who feels like they care about funding abortion in this country through a Jewish lens to feel welcome in this space. And whether they're Jewish or they just love people who are Jewish or they love our perspective on how we're doing this work, I want them to feel welcome here. So the tent imagery really worked.
I spent a lot of time this Yom Kippur. I mean, you read the prayers, but there's also poems and things to ruminate on. as the services go on. And there was a lot about how we treat the stranger. And yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because it's something that's been on my mind and, very difficult topic in this country and who and how we consider a stranger and what that means and how society is different from when those words were written and who a stranger was then versus who a stranger is now. And it's been difficult because right now we're also scared. So people who are, strangers or, could be somebody who could do us harm. So it's a hard space to be in, but yeah. So you are projected to raise about $500,000 in 2025. And for a new initiative, that's, I think, a staggering amount. Like, you should be so proud of that number. Do you feel like leaving DC Abortion Fund, you had so much support into this new initiative that allowed you to have the successes you're currently having?
Yeah, I do. So yeah, we're on track to fund $500,000, over $500,000 in abortion procedures in 2025. Our average patient pledge is about $360. So, we are on track to fund, well over 1,000 procedures in this year. Which is so exciting. And like you said, for an organization that's been around for 18 months, that's really exciting and incredible. I'm always mindful of what the actual need is out there. It is so great. It is so high. There are so many people who need funding for their procedures who can't access it. And so I'm always torn between this tension of so proud of everything we've done in such a short amount of time, and also very mindful of the fact there is a long road ahead and I want to be doing so much more. But yes, the Jewish community has been phenomenal since we launched Red Tent Fund. The Chicago community in particular has been fantastic. Chicago was the place that I went first after really launching the organization. I did my first fundraising, we called a fundraising sprint, in Chicago in the fall of 2024. I talked to a couple hundred people over 3 days in a variety of settings, in synagogues and in people's homes and in one-on-one meetings. And the Chicago community just was incredible. They just were like, yep, we got it. We're here for you. Introduced me to people in their networks, offered support, provided funding. Just absolutely incredible. And so I have a very special place in my heart for Chicago when it comes to the Red Tent Fund.
We're a special city, but I'm a little biased.
You really are. It seems like everybody went to Michigan or knows someone who went to Michigan. Everybody knows everybody. And everybody's so excited to come out and support this work. And I'm just so grateful for that.
Well, Alli, it's been such a pleasure speaking with you today. I really enjoyed our conversation. Our mission has been to uplift and platform the diversity of Zionist voices. And hearing your story and learning about your work today, we really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. It's such a pleasure.
That was Allison Tombros Korman. A reminder that Judaism isn't shaped by the loudest ideology, but by the people willing to do the quiet, complicated work of caring for each other. You don't have to agree with everything she said to see the value in wrestling with it. Judaism has always lived in tension, in interpretation, disagreement, and responsibility, not in slogans. The Red Tent Fund isn't trying to win a cultural war. They're serving real people with real needs in a community that's supposed to show up for its own. If you want to learn more, support the work, or simply understand better, visit theredtentfund.org. As always, Jew and Stew is here for real conversations, honest, nuanced, and rooted in Jewish life rather than performative politics. Share this episode, argue about it over dinner, or just sit with it. Until next time, stay curious, stay courageous, and stay Jewish.
Follow the Chicago Jewish Alliance to stay in the loop and subscribe to this podcast so you can see what's coming next. We're going to have speakers that represent the entire spectrum of the Jewish community, from philosophical thinkers, from soldiers, people on the front lines of advocacy work on universities. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next time.